We love to admire billionaires. We scroll past their luxury cars, their glass mansions, their private jets, and we whisper to ourselves, one day that will be me. But what if I told you? The real story behind some of that wealth would make you sick to your stomach, that the price they paid isn't measured in dollars, but in something far darker. Before we continue, please kindly tell us where you are watching from and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Nup Stories always have emotional and educational stories for you. By subscribing, you give us more effort to upload videos like this. Daniel was the kind of man you might pass on the street and never notice. He blended into the background. One more commuter with a laptop bag, one more tired face on the subway, one more dreamer trying to keep the lights on. At 34, he had what most would call an ordinary life. A modest apartment, a modest job, a modest bank account that always seemed one step away from overdraft. Every morning began the same. The alarm clock would pierce the silence before sunrise, and Daniel would grope for it with one hand, eyes still shut, wishing for just 10 more minutes of sleep. Coffee was never hot enough, shirts never ironed enough, traffic always just bad enough to remind him that he was not in control. He worked long hours at a small tech firm, a job that was reliable, respectable even, but one that left him feeling like a cog in a machine that didn't care if he ever stopped turning. Daniel wasn't greedy. Not exactly. He just wanted what everyone wants, a chance to breathe, a break from bills, a taste of freedom. He wanted to stop checking his bank balance before buying groceries. He wanted to stop telling his wife maybe next month when she suggested taking their little boy to the zoo. He wanted to look at his son without feeling that he was failing him. And yet in quiet moments, when everyone else was asleep, Daniel would scroll through his phone and stare at the lives of the rich. The billionaires with glass houses and private jets. The self-made success stories giving motivational speeches online. A stubborn little voice whispered to him every time he saw them. Why not you? You work hard. You play by the rules. So why are they on top of the world while you're just barely hanging on? Maya, his wife, never complained. She was the kind of woman who could turn a cheap dinner into a celebration and who still smiled at Daniel, even when she was exhausted. But he saw the quiet sadness in her eyes when she sorted through the bills, deciding which ones could be pushed back without getting a late fee. She didn't have to say a word. Daniel could feel her disappointment like a weight pressing against his chest. And then there was Leo, their little boy with the wild curls and boundless energy, who once pointed at a shiny toy in a store and asked, "Daddy, can we get it?" Daniel had to say no. That night, he had lain awake staring at the ceiling long after his family had gone to sleep. Guilt heavy in his gut. Something had to change. Somehow he had to get ahead. He didn't know how, but he knew this much. He couldn't go on like this forever. And then, as if the universe had been listening, an unexpected message arrived. It was from Ellis, an old college friend he hadn't spoken to in years. Ellis had always been different. Back in school, he had been the guy who always had a hustle, always knew someone who knew someone, always seemed to land on his feet no matter what happened. After graduation, Ellis disappeared into a life Daniel could only glimpse through social media posts, luxury vacations, rooftop dinners, expensive suits. The message was simple. Big event this weekend. Networking, investors, billionaires, you should come. Life-changing stuff. Daniel read it twice, 3 times. It sounded ridiculous, like something from a movie. He almost ignored it. Networking events were for people who had something to pitch, something to sell, some version of themselves they were proud of. But there was something about Ellis's words that felt different. Urgent, even. And Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the phrase life-changing. By Saturday, curiosity had gotten the better of him. He drove out of the city, watching as the buildings grew taller, then fewer, until the houses were no longer houses but estates. The streets were quieter here, the air cleaner, the cars sleeker. By the time he reached the gates, his jaw had slackened. Ellis was waiting at the entrance, grinning like a man who had everything he'd ever wanted. He looked different, sharper, more polished. He greeted Daniel like no time had passed and led him inside. And that was when Daniel saw it. The mansion. Not just a house, not just wealth, but a statement. Sprawling gardens, a driveway that looked like it could host a parade, fountains that sprayed water into the air like they were trying to touch the stars. It was the kind of place Daniel had only seen in magazines, the kind of place he secretly resented, the kind of place he had told himself he didn't need. Inside, the rooms glowed with warm golden light. The air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and polished wood. Guests mingled in designer clothes, champagne glasses in hand, laughing softly like they didn't have a care in the world. Daniel felt out of place at first, the way you feel when you walk into a dream that doesn't belong to you. But Ellis stayed close, introducing him to people whose names sounded familiar from headlines. And then he saw him, Victor Harrington. Victor was not what Daniel expected. There was no arrogance about him, no bored look that said he'd rather be anywhere else. He was tall, well-dressed, but carried himself with the ease of someone who had nothing left to prove. When he smiled, it was the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. When Victor finally walked over and said, "You must be Daniel," it was like the whole party paused for a second. Daniel nodded awkwardly, half expecting Victor to shake his hand politely and move on, but instead Victor stayed. He asked questions about Daniel's work, his family, his dreams. He listened carefully, never once checking his watch or glancing over Daniel's shoulder. That was what struck Daniel most. People with money usually made you feel small. Victor made him feel important. Victor spoke with a calm confidence that was magnetic. He told Daniel about how he had built everything from nothing, how everyone thought he was crazy when he started, how the secret wasn't just money, but knowing where to look for opportunity when everyone else was blind. He said something that stuck in Daniel's mind long after the conversation ended. People look at this house and think it's about money. It's not. It's about freedom. Money is just the key. Most people never figure out which door to unlock. When the night was nearly over, Victor pulled Daniel aside and said something that made his pulse quicken. "Ellis says you're sharp, hard-working. I like that. Come back tomorrow. I have a proposition for you, something that could change your life." And then he smiled, a calm, knowing smile that sent a shiver through Daniel's chest. On the drive home, Daniel couldn't stop replaying the evening in his mind. The mansion, the art, the confidence in Victor's voice. For the first time in years, he felt hope flicker inside him. Real hope. The kind that made his chest feel warm. Maybe this was the door Victor had been talking about. Maybe this was how you went from ordinary to extraordinary. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything he would finally be able to give Maya and Leo. A real home. A college fund. A life where Maya never had to sit at the kitchen table with tears in her eyes because the bills didn't add up. Daniel didn't know what Victor was going to offer him. He didn't know what the cost might be. All he knew was this. Tomorrow, he was going back. And of course, Daniel had no way of knowing that sometimes the door you've been waiting your whole life to open doesn't lead to paradise. Sometimes, it leads straight into the dark. Daniel accepted Victor's offer without hesitation. The next morning, he returned to the mansion, his stomach tight with a mix of nerves and excitement. Victor welcomed him personally, not like an employee, but like an equal. A rare gesture that made Daniel feel chosen. Victor explained very little about what Daniel's new position involved. Special operations, he called it, with a small smile that gave away nothing. There were no official titles, no business cards, no corporate office with Daniel's name on the door. Instead, there were quiet instructions, discreet meetings, and access to accounts Daniel had never dreamed he'd be allowed to touch. The first task was simple, a transfer here and approval there. It felt harmless, almost boring. But then the payments started rolling in. Overnight, the crushing weight of Daniel's debt vanished. The credit card balance that had been haunting him, gone. The student loans that had been gnawing at him for years, paid off with a single click. The change was so sudden it felt unreal. For the first time in years, Daniel could breathe. He and Maya moved into a better apartment, not extravagant but beautiful, with space for Leo to run around. He upgraded the car that used to stall every winter. He bought Maya the leather bag she'd once admired in a store window and quickly tried to hide the tears in her eyes when she unwrapped it. Even Leo noticed the difference. He no longer had to hear, "Not today, buddy." The toy truck he'd wanted for months appeared one morning on the kitchen table with a little note from Daniel, "For my superhero." For a while, life felt perfect. Daniel felt like he was finally winning. He carried himself differently now, shoulders back, chin high, walking like a man who had unlocked some secret door no one else could find. He was no longer the man scrolling through luxury posts at night feeling sorry for himself. He was on the inside now. But perfection never lasts. It started small. Instructions would come at odd hours, sometimes past midnight. Daniel would receive encrypted messages telling him to authorize transfers, move funds, sign digital approvals. When he asked what the money was for, Victor's assistant would simply reply, "It's above your clearance, just do as instructed." Daniel told himself it was normal. He was handling the financial machinery of a billionaire empire. Of course it was complex. Of course some things wouldn't make sense to him, but the unease lingered. Then came the night he overheard something that made his stomach turn. He had stayed late at the mansion, waiting to deliver some signed approvals to Victor. The house was mostly empty. The music from the earlier gathering had gone quiet, and he found himself near the west wing, just outside a half-closed door. Inside, Victor's security team was speaking in low, urgent voices. "We've got to clean up the situation before it spreads." "What about the driver? Does he know anything?" "Oh, but we can't take risks. You know the protocol." Daniel froze. He didn't know what they were talking about. He didn't want to know. He backed away from the door quietly and pretended he hadn't heard a thing. Driving home that night, his mind spun. What did they mean by clean up the situation? Was it just corporate talk? Some legal matter? Some business deal going wrong? Or was it something else? Something darker? Daniel told himself he was overthinking it. People like Victor operated at a level the rest of the world couldn't understand. This was just how the ultra-wealthy worked. Quiet, efficient, secretive. There was nothing to worry about. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and seeds always grow. Over the next few weeks, the strangeness became harder to ignore. Ellis, the very man who had brought Daniel into this world, was suddenly nowhere to be found. His number stopped working. His social media went silent. When Daniel asked Victor casually if he had spoken to Ellis, Victor only said, he decided to take a break from work, and change the subject. Maya, too, started to notice that something was off. She saw the way Daniel stared at his phone late at night, the way he jumped when it buzzed, the way his shoulders tightened when he thought no one was looking. One night, as they sat in their new kitchen surrounded by gleaming appliances they could finally afford, she said softly, "Dan, I don't recognize you anymore." He looked at her, startled. "You're here, but you're not here," she continued. "You stay up late. You barely eat. You snap at me over nothing. Where is all this money coming from?" Daniel stayed silent for a moment too long. "Maya," he said finally, "you don't have to worry about that. I'm protecting you." "Protecting me from what?" she asked, her voice breaking. But he had no answer that wouldn't unravel everything. That night, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed after she had gone to sleep, staring at the floor. The guilt gnawed at him. He told himself it was temporary, just a rough patch, just until he figured out exactly what Victor's operation was about. Then, he'd decide what to do. But deep down, Daniel knew something was wrong. He had everything he thought he wanted. Money, security, status. And yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he had stepped onto a road that might not have an exit. The strange transfers, the late-night instructions, the cryptic language he overheard. And Ellis. Where had Ellis gone? Every time Daniel started to push for answers, Victor would appear with that calm, reassuring smile, and a reminder that he was part of the team now. That loyalty was rewarded. That asking too many questions too early was how promising men got themselves into trouble. It should have comforted Daniel. It didn't. The more his bank account grew, the heavier his chest felt. The more he could buy, the less he slept at night. And still, he told himself to keep going. Because walking away now would mean giving up everything: the house, the security, the chance to give Leo the life he never had. He told himself this was just the price of success. But deep down, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just paying a price. He was becoming part of something. Something he didn't understand. And whatever it was, he was in too deep to walk away. Ellis's absence began as a whisper. At first, Daniel simply noticed that Ellis wasn't around as often. The cheerful messages that used to pop up on his phone at odd hours stopped coming. No more invitations to late-night drinks. No more quick jokes about living like kings. Then the whisper grew. People around Victor's circle spoke of Ellis with hushed voices. Some said he'd taken an extended leave. Others muttered that he'd had a breakdown and gone somewhere remote to recover. No one had details, and the vagueness made it worse. When Daniel asked Victor directly, the billionaire gave a calm, dismissive smile. Ellis was under pressure, Victor said lightly as though it was nothing. Sometimes people aren't cut out for this level of responsibility. Don't worry about him. Focus on your work. It should have reassured Daniel. Instead, it gnawed at him. Ellis wasn't the type to run. He was the type to push forward no matter what. And yet, he had vanished like smoke. Then one sleepless night, while scrolling on his phone, Daniel froze. There it was, Ellis's face, staring back at him from a missing person bulletin. The photo wasn't new, but the date was 3 days ago. Daniel's breath caught. His pulse hammered in his ears. That was the moment he realized the truth. He wasn't working for a mentor. He wasn't being groomed for some shining future. He was part of something much bigger and much darker. The thought haunted him the next morning, the next night, the next week. It haunted him when he sat across from Victor at meetings, when he signed off on transfers, when Maya asked why he looked so pale. Finally, Daniel couldn't take it anymore. If no one would tell him the truth, he would find it himself. Late one night after Maya and Leo were asleep, Daniel sat in the darkened living room with his laptop open. He had access to some of Victor's systems, just enough to do his job. But Daniel was clever. Clever enough to bypass certain protocols. Clever enough to slip quietly into places he wasn't supposed to go. Every click felt dangerous. Every screen he opened made his heart race. And then he found it, the encrypted archive. It took hours to break through the first layer, then hours more to get past the second. The deeper he went, the more a single question burned in his mind. What am I about to see? Finally, the files opened. At first, it looked like financial data, transfers, shell companies, offshore accounts. Daniel told himself it was nothing unusual. The wealthy always had complicated structures for their money. But then he saw the notes, not just numbers, not just balances. Notes in plain language. Harvest completed, shipment ready for transport. South corridor secure, next extraction window 3 weeks. Daniel's skin went cold. He read faster, scrolling through pages of coded but unmistakable reports. This wasn't about drugs. It wasn't about weapons. It was about people. About what was being taken from them. About what was being sold. He slammed the laptop shut, his breath coming in sharp gasps. It didn't seem real. It couldn't be real. This had to be fake-planted files, forged documents meant to frame Victor by a competitor. That had to be it. But Daniel couldn't leave it alone. The next night he went back in, this time digging deeper. His hands shook as he worked. And then he found it. A file marked with Ellis's name. Inside was a document, Ellis's signed confession, dated just days before he disappeared. Daniel stared at the screen, numb. Ellis had admitted to helping move funds for what the document described as procurement operations. There were phrases Ellis had underlined. They promised no one would get hurt. I didn't know at first. Please don't let this be the end of me. It wasn't just a business deal gone wrong. Ellis had been scared, terrified. Daniel sat back in his chair, the room spinning. His first instinct was denial. Maybe Ellis had been forced to sign this. Maybe he was being framed too. But the signature was Ellis's without a doubt. Daniel had seen it enough times on contracts to know. For a long time, Daniel just sat there in the dark, staring at nothing. By morning, he had made a decision. He needed proof. Real proof. He began to dig deeper. This time, not just into files, but into people. Victor's associates, the contractors, even the security staff. Quietly, carefully, always pretending that everything was normal. But every answer he found only led to more questions. He discovered a network of fake companies spread across multiple countries, entities with no employees, no websites, no products. Yet money flowed through them in staggering amounts, vanishing into accounts Daniel couldn't trace. He discovered shipping logs for private planes, cargo manifests labeled only with cryptic codes. He discovered names ordinary people, not business partners. Next to some of the names were dates. Next to others, nothing at all. The more he uncovered, the harder it became to sleep. During the day, he tried to act normal. He laughed when Victor made jokes, nodded at meetings, played the part of the loyal protege. But inside, Daniel was unraveling. Maya could feel it. She asked him again one night, her voice shaking this time. "Daniel, what are you doing? Where's all this money coming from? You're scaring me." He wanted to tell her everything. The words sat on his tongue, but he swallowed them. If he told her, she would be in danger too. "I'm protecting you," he said again. But this time Maya didn't believe him. She turned away from him in bed that night, tears silent on her pillow. Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling, his mind a storm. Everywhere he looked, there were contradictions. Victor was a public saint, a man who donated to hospitals, funded scholarships, spoke about justice and equality at galas. He was beloved online, the kind of billionaire people actually liked. How could that man be the monster in those files? Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe someone was using Victor's empire as a cover. And yet, every trail Daniel followed led back to the same place. Victor's private accounts, Victor's secure servers, Victor's inner circle. The more Daniel tried to find proof that Victor was innocent, the more he found proof that he wasn't. And still, part of him didn't want to believe. Because believing would mean accepting that everything Daniel had now, the house, the money, the new life, was built on something unthinkable. Believing would mean that he wasn't just complicit. He was part of it. Daniel had rehearsed what he was going to say 100 times. But when he stepped into Victor Harrington's private office that night, the words felt like ash in his mouth. The room was colder than usual. Not physically, no. It was the atmosphere, the silence, the sense that something was waiting here for him. The office was lined with paintings, priceless, beautiful, staring down like silent witnesses. A massive black desk sat at the center, polished so smooth that Daniel could see his reflection in it, pale, exhausted, haunted. Victor sat behind the desk calm as ever, a drink in one hand, the faintest smile on his face. "You've been busy," Victor said softly. Not angry, not surprised, just amused. Daniel swallowed hard. "You know why I'm here," he said. His voice was steadier than he expected. Victor nodded. "I do, and I respect it, Daniel. That curiosity of yours, it's part of why I picked you." He stood, slow and deliberate, and walked around the desk until he was standing close enough that Daniel could smell the cologne on his jacket. "You've been looking where you shouldn't," Victor said, his tone almost fatherly. "And now you're faced with a choice. Because curiosity, my friend, it always has a price." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. "I'm not like Ellis," he said. "I won't disappear quietly." Victor chuckled, low and genuine. Ellis didn't disappear because he was weak. He disappeared because he made a choice. Same choice you have now. He gestured to the chair in front of his desk. "Sit." Daniel hesitated, then sat. Victor leaned against the edge of the desk, casual, as if this was nothing more than a late-night chat between friends. "Here's the deal," Victor said. "You can stay silent, keep doing your job, keep your house, your money, your family safe, or—" He let the word hang in the air, a pause heavy enough to crush the room. "You can walk away, lose it all, but keep that shiny conscience of yours." Daniel stared at him. "You're saying if I stay silent, people keep getting hurt, and if I speak up, you get hurt," Victor finished for him. "And your family? They'll never be the same. I can make that happen without lifting a finger." The smile never left Victor's face. It wasn't a threat, it was a guarantee. For a long moment, Daniel didn't move. The weight of the decision pressed on his chest like a stone. He thought about Maya, about Leo. He thought about Ellis's missing person poster. He thought about the files on his laptop. And he realized something. If he stayed silent, he wouldn't be protecting his family. He'd be sentencing them to live in a house built on blood. "I can't," Daniel whispered finally. Victor tilted his head. "Can't what?" "I can't stay quiet." For the first time, Victor's smile faded. He straightened, nodded once, and returned to his chair. "Then we're done here," he said simply. Daniel didn't wait for anything else. He left the mansion with his heart in his throat, drove home without remembering the road, and stayed up all night preparing everything. By morning, he had gathered every file, every message, every piece of evidence he could, and then he did the unthinkable. He went to the police. The next few days were a blur. Investigators took his statement. Lawyers got involved. The story exploded on the news. It was everywhere, the biggest scandal of the decade. But then the shock came. When the case hit the headlines, it wasn't Victor's face the world saw. It was Daniel's. The news anchors called him the mastermind. Every file, every encrypted message, every transfer, they were traced back to him. His accounts, his logins, his signature on the documents. Victor's name barely appeared in the reports. A victim of internal fraud. Daniel sat in his living room staring at the television, numb. This isn't possible," he whispered. But it was. He had been thorough. He had been careful, But he had been playing a game designed by someone far smarter, far richer, far more powerful. Victor hadn't just given Daniel access to his empire. He had built the perfect paper trail leading back to him. Every click Daniel had made, every transfer he'd approved, every file he had opened in secret. It had all been recorded, manipulated, positioned so that, when the time came, Daniel would look like the architect of the entire operation. Victor had been ready for this from the start. Daniel wasn't the hero, he was the scapegoat. When the police came to arrest him, Maya was crying, clutching Leo. "You said you were protecting us," she screamed as they put him in handcuffs. Daniel didn't fight. He didn't speak. In the patrol car, staring out at the flashing lights, he heard Victor's voice in his head, calm and chilling. "Pawns don't become kings, Daniel. They get sacrificed." In prison, Daniel's name became infamous. Some called him a monster. Some called him a genius gone wrong. Only Daniel knew the truth, that the real mastermind was still out there, smiling for cameras, donating to charities, shaking hands with world leaders. The world still adored Victor Harrington. And Daniel? He was just another cautionary tale. Months later, Daniel received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photograph: Victor at a gala, champagne glass in hand, the same faint smile on his face. On the back of the photo, a single handwritten line: "You made the right choice. Your family is safe." Daniel stared at it for a long time before tearing it in half, because he finally understood Victor hadn't destroyed him out of anger. He had destroyed him as part of the game. And Daniel had played his role perfectly. Daniel sat on the edge of the hard prison cot, his face hollowed by weeks without sleep. The sound of metal doors clanging echoed down the hallway, a grim reminder of where his choices had led him. On the small TV mounted high in the corner of the cell, Victor Harrington appeared, his perfect smile lighting up the evening news. He was standing in front of cameras, hand extended as he shook a politician's hand, donating millions to a children's hospital. The reporters called him visionary, self-made genius, philanthropist of the decade. In that moment, Daniel felt something break inside him. Not anger, not hatred, just the cold, heavy realization that he had been erased. Victor hadn't just destroyed him. He had rewritten the story so that Daniel was the villain and Victor remained the hero. Maya wouldn't visit. She couldn't bear to. She was raising Leo alone now. Their house gone, their accounts frozen, their reputation scorched. Leo would grow up believing his father was a criminal mastermind. Daniel lowered his head into his hands, and somewhere in a quiet living room, in a buzzing coffee shop, in bedrooms lit only by the glow of a phone screen, someone was scrolling through their feed, seeing Victor's photo, whispering under their breath, "One day that will be me." Narrator, slow, powerful. The world still calls him a genius, a philanthropist, a role model, and maybe he is, but not for the reasons they think. He's a role model for a different truth, that power isn't just about money. It's about who gets to tell the story. The camera lingers on Daniel's face, lit by the flicker of the TV, his eyes hollow but burning with something, age, grief, maybe a dangerous resolve. Then darkness. We envy the outcome, but we never see the cost. We worship the winners without asking how they won. Be careful what you admire, because behind some fortunes lies a truth, darker than any nightmare. And sometimes the real price isn't paid by the people who earned the fortune. It's paid by those who stood too close. Daniel thought he'd finally caught a break. New house, debt gone, his family smiling for the first time in years. But the messages he received at midnight, the friend who vanished without a trace, and the files he found hidden on his billionaire mentor's server, they would turn his dream life into a nightmare. Because when Daniel finally decided to do the right thing, to expose the truth, the world didn't call him a hero. They called him a criminal, and the man who built his fortune on the darkest secret imaginable. He walked away smiling. And if this story moves, hit the subscribe button and share your thought on the comment section.